Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Gerardo Poli.
And this, sorry. Okay.
I'm Gerardo Poli.
I'm Hubert Hemstra, and this is the Vet Vault. In today's episode, we get a bit of an outsider's perspective on our profession, but given by an insider. Let me explain. Roz Lindsay's career started as a veterinarian, but after several years of working in clinical practice in both the UK and Australia, she transitioned into a career in human pharmaceuticals. This piqued her interest in business, management, and leadership, with a particular focus on the inner workings of teams within the healthcare profession. So that's doctors and vets, dentists, physios. Fast forward to the present. These days, Roz is an accomplished trainer and facilitator in her learning and development company for healthcare teams. She has a passion for people development with a particular interest in leadership, team development, and the neuroscience and psychology of human interaction. Her background in veterinary science, with her subsequent years of experience in sales and customer service, operations and management in healthcare services outside of vet, gives her a unique perspective into the challenges that we face in our profession. And it's why we loved having her as a guest on the show and why we know you'll love her content.
Roz talks us through her decision to leave clinical veterinary practice and gives some fantastic advice on how to think through the decision for anyone considering leaving this profession. We talk about stress as a neurophysiological response rather than just an emotion, and explore the concept of good stress. Roz gives us her views on the most common causes of dysfunctional teams in the healthcare sphere, where sayings like all nurses eat their young are tragically commonplace, and we talk about the biggest killers of good teams. We have a neat little summary and some of the best bits from the episode and all of the others, including links to books and other resources at www. Did I do 4 W's then?
You may have, that's fine.
I'll just do it again. Go.
Okay.
Including links and books and other resources at www.thevetvault.com. So head over and check it out. Please enjoy Roz Lindsay.
Good morning, Vet Vaulters, and welcome to another episode, and welcome to our guest, Roz Lindsay. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hey guys, thanks so much for having me. It's a great honor to be on the show today.
Roz, if you've listened to the last few episodes, you'll know that we like to start with a question about decisions. It's a start with a statement rather than a question. Bad decisions lead to good stories. Do you agree or do you disagree?
This is a really interesting one. And I ponder, I don't think there's a agree or disagree. I think it depends. And I think sometimes yes and sometimes no. And for me, in terms of bad decisions and thinking about, what's a story that I can think of? And I can think of lots of bad decisions I've made throughout my life. And some of them lead to good stories and some of them maybe not so good stories. But for me, it's probably thinking back about my decision to leave veterinary practice, which was many years ago. And a lot of people around me, my family, a lot of friends thought I was crazy. They thought that was a terrible decision to leave veterinary practice because everyone wants to be a vet, right? And your family are so proud when you're a vet. This is awesome. And I don't know even now, probably, it's probably about almost 20 years later, whether or not it was actually a good decision or a bad decision. But a lot of people around me thought it was a bad decision. And the interesting thing is it actually did lead to a good story because leaving the profession opened up a lot of opportunities for me. It also meant that I left behind some really great things that I love about veterinary practice. It opened up some new doors though. And so it's a good story because it's led to such diversity in my career. And I'm kind of happy where I am now.
Mm-hmm. Was it a bad decision on of your family's, like your inner circle's minds, because the fact that you were heading into an area which was like a little bit, I don't know, whiffy-waffy or something? Like it wasn't like you're leaving from one solid profession to another solid profession. It's like you're leaving vet medicine to go be a human doctor, right? There's a lot of vets who've done that, right?
Yeah.
So is it because there was a lack of kind of they couldn't see the same value, or they couldn't see the same certainty or security or something for you in your chosen where you're going to head?
I think that's a really good question. I think it's probably a bit of both, and it probably depended on the actual person. I think my dad, who is now no longer with us, I think that till the day he died, he told everyone I was a vet, because he didn't quite understand what I do now, which is in training and development. And I don't think he ever really got it. And I think part of it for him was not only not getting it, he was so proud of me being a vet. So I think part of it for some family and friends was the status that they saw, and they loved the fact that, you know, my dad loved that his daughter was a vet, and my friends loved that their friend was a vet, and who doesn't love a vet, right? So I think people miss that, which is kind of sad in a way, although I do understand it.
I think it's, other than other people, it's definitely a mental thing. It certainly is for me, and I think lots of vets are like that. I think because you have such a vision, even in high school, I'm going to be a vet, very well-defined thing. A study is all that you know. You're into, most of us, into clinical practice, again, very well-defined. When it comes to that decision, and I've certainly been at that point thinking about it, should I leave or not? It's extremely scary, because of that, because you go, well, like when I meet people without a defined career, so if you're not a teacher or a lawyer or something, I struggle to get what they do. It's exactly like you say about your dad. I'm like, well, yeah, but what do you actually do? What is your job? And then to think about yourself, to picture yourself in the future. Okay, I'm not a vet, so what am I going to do? It's a scary thing. And I think a few times that probably stopped me from seriously thinking about leaving.
It's a tough decision. And look, if I'm honest, I sometimes miss being a vet as well. And I still am a vet. And that's the thing that I probably struggle with the most all these years later. I actually still am a vet. Mm-hmm. And we sometimes forget that. I've got the degree. I've actually thought about going back, and I've spoken about, you know, even thinking about that recently. But I'm not a practicing vet. And that's hard for people to get their head around as well, myself included. But yeah, it's a big thing. And I don't miss going to parties and people say, what do you do? I'm a vet. Well, I have a cat. Can you help me with this? You guys know that. You must still get that. I don't get that anymore. If I say, oh, I work in leadership and teams training and development, I just get the blank look. But it's kind of nice because I don't have to answer vet questions anymore.
Roz, what would be your, you know, like coming from a coach perspective, from a, you know, training leadership perspective as well, like what would be, how would you coach someone if they came to you guys, I'm thinking of leaving vet for this? Like, what kind of things would you get them to think about? I don't know if that's an easy question. Like, how could you guide someone to feel a little bit more certain about, you know, leaving a profession they chose?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've never actually thought about that before. But, you know, thinking on my feet, which being a vet taught me to do, I would definitely ask them to think about, firstly, what do you love about being a vet? What gives you joy? I'd also ask them to think about what are the things that you really don't like, that are frustrating or very stressful for you. I'd think also about what strengths can you transfer into other areas, other professions. You know, what are the strengths that vet has given you could apply elsewhere? And then I'd ask them to think about, you know, in 80 years' time, when you're 80, looking back on your life, what are some of the highlights that you hope to be thinking about, some of the things that you've hoped you've achieved, and really from there start to coach them. I think that would take a number of discussions to start to coach them to think through, okay, if you're looking back and that's the success that you've had, what area of profession will give that to you? Or can vets still give that to you? Is there another avenue of using your veterinary degree that could move you into a field that's going to give you the success that you're looking for? And I'd also encourage them to think about, is it moving out of the profession? Is that going to solve whatever issue you might be having? because I think many vets leave the profession because it is stressful and it's overwhelming, and we think it's going to be solved by switching. Not everyone does that, but, sometimes that's the reason why. And often we get similar problems in other professions and other careers, and moving out of a profession that we've worked toward all our life is stressful. So I definitely coach them to understand the reality of that, and that, yes, leaving the profession in the short term may take off the burden, yet prepare them for other burdens that they might experience. Like not having that status, people don't understand what you do if you move into another profession, and maybe don't look up to you as much. And I know it's funny to keep talking about status, but it is one of the things that I've found most awkward about changing, particularly when I went from, I tried a few different small things, but then I fell into a sales representative role with a human health pharmaceutical company. And so I'm turning up at doctor's surgeries as a sales rep. And that was a massive change in status, because most people don't want to talk to the sales rep, and it was really hard. So I think, you need to be prepared for the reality of those sorts of changes.
We definitely tie who we are up into the term vet, don't we? I've thought about it a lot recently. There's definitely, I am Hubert Hemstra, veterinarian. Take that away and you go, whoa, okay, who am I? And it's not the right thing. I've been reading lots about how you shouldn't actually tie your identity up into anything at all. I am just who I am. But it's very natural to take that away and you go, okay, well, what's left? I'm not sure.
Yeah. And I think that's the thing, which is why I was alluding to what is there outside of your work? Because as a vet, you work so hard, you work such long hours, you're exhausted at the end of the day. And oftentimes you're not doing things that give you joy outside of the work because you're too tired, or you're socializing with other vets. So you're talking about work all the time. And I think it doesn't give you perhaps some balance. Work-life balance to me is not about everything being equal. It's about being a balanced person and having interests and activities that are not related to your work. And I think sometimes that's why as vets, we do get caught up. I am a vet, because it is such a big part of our life. You're on call. It's every waking moment for many people.
Talk us through your decision to leave, if you don't mind, Roz. What were you doing? Tell us a bit of your story. What were you doing? Why did you leave? Where did you go? And what do you do now? That's a long question.
That is a long question. That's okay. I can answer that. So maybe kind of share my journey is probably the better way, because I don't think it was that one light bulb moment, or I sat down one day and said, I'm going to answer these questions and then I'll know. So I started out in a regional area in New South Wales, and I was working mixed animal practice. And I was there for, probably about 18 months, maybe a little bit longer, and then went to the UK, like many vets in my era, and probably still now as well. Went over to the UK and was in small animal practice, locuming around the UK, travelling, having a great time. My husband is a vet, actually. He's a specialist now. And so both of us were locuming and having a really great time doing that. And then when we came back to Australia, I was in suburban small animal practice. So I kind of seen a lot of different practices and the ways that they operated. And I don't know, in the UK, I just started to think, I'm not getting the joy that I thought I would get from this. There are a lot of things that I loved. I loved connecting with people. I loved the animals, of course. But there are a lot of things that I didn't like. And over this period of time when we're traveling different practices, I was experiencing different bosses, different environments, different teams that I was working in. And I was finding it a really hard thing to get enjoyment from. I was just finding the hours were long. I was seeing a lot of negative in the profession. Yeah. And when I came back to Australia, I kind of thought, well, this is a good opportunity to maybe think about, is this right for me? And I was still practicing then and doing some locum work. And I can remember over this period transitioning back into Australia thinking, is this what I want to be doing when I'm 50 or 60? And the answer constantly coming back to me each time I thought about this was no. And so it wasn't a light bulb moment. And I just reached that point where I thought, well, it's now or never. I actually have to do something. And I was in a period in between jobs, in between locum jobs. And I just said, right, I'm going to figure this out. And a lot of people had talked to me about moving into pharmaceuticals and sales jobs and how that might perhaps work, because I really loved connecting with people and I love talking to people. As you can tell, I'm a talker. And yeah, I don't remember kind of the day, the moment that it happened, but I said, yep, let's start exploring the pharmaceutical industry. And so I went for a couple of jobs and then I was successful, and it kind of just happened, which is, I don't know, it probably didn't just happen, but that's the thought process. It wasn't a lightning bolt moment. It was just, I'm not getting the joy. What else is there out there? What do I like doing? And I fell into it, and I stayed in the pharmaceutical industry for quite a long period of time, probably all up about 12 years, working with Merck Sharp and Dohme, and then I worked with Amgen. And so these were big companies, and I was very fortunate to have lots of different positions in those companies. And I just found that, you know, I really loved business, I loved healthcare, and yeah, I love this whole connecting with people, which led me into management roles, which, you know, I got a lot of joy from.
And that led you to what you're doing now?
Yeah, so it did. I was fortunate to, I hadn't, even within the pharmaceutical industry, I had an unusual pathway in many respects, because I moved into operations management and then moved into sales management. And then I had an opportunity to take up a secondment in a training role. And in the pharmaceutical industry, that's not technically how you'd go. You'd normally go into training as a stepping stone into management. Yet I'd always been, and looking back, it's easier for me to figure it out. When I fell into training, everything fell into place. And looking back, the things that I loved about being a vet: animal behaviour, human behaviour, the brain, that was always of great fascination to me as a vet. And then when I was a manager, I really loved that whole connection with people and trying to understand, how do you get the best out of people? So when I fell into training, it all fell into place. This was about behaviour, it's about understanding, you know, human interaction, and it's about getting the best out of people. So I did that for a period of time in biotechnology with Amgen, and then I just decided this is time to go out and run my own business. I had always wanted to run my own business. Even when I was a kid thinking about being a vet, I had my whole practice planned out and I knew it was going to be mine. So moving into, I even knew where it was. It was on a main road for some reason. I don't know why. It was on a main road in a brick house. And so running my own business was really something I wanted to do. And so it reached a point in my career where I'm ready, I can do it. And I moved then out to set up a learning and development business. And now that actually has 3 arms. So a lot of face-to-face work, which is not happening currently, of course, and working in the areas of customer service, management, leadership, and teams. Teams and getting teams working together is my real passion. And then last year I set up an online business, which is for healthcare teams and leadership specifically. And healthcare is One Health in my mind, so it's human and animal health. So people looking to develop their teams and develop their leadership skills. And then the third arm, which I've set up this year to support people in the COVID era, yet more longer term, is a Facebook group where it's free interaction and connection and learning about teams and leadership for, again, across animal, human health.
So that's Engage Your Healthcare Leadership.
That's the online business, yes. So Engage Your Healthcare Leadership. That's the online where you can have access to courses on leadership and team development. And the Facebook group, just to confuse you, is called We Lead Healthcare. Okay. And that's where a lot of my attention and focus is at the moment, supporting people in there.
I love picturing young Roz Most kids who dream about being vet dream about puppies and horses. Roz is dreaming about a brick building on a main road.
This time of this big to attract that much traffic and
Absolutely. Business. See, I love business. It's fascinating. I think that's what I loved about the pharmaceutical industry, learning about business and skills in a really big context as well.
So, training teams and working with teams, or training people to work with teams. You didn't choose an easy career, did you? It's not like you were too lazy to do vet, or it was too challenging. Because you go straight for a very challenging career for anybody who has ever tried to lead or manage a team of people. I'm interested that you focus your attention on healthcare specifically. Are there things unique about healthcare teams, do you think, compared to management in a pharmaceutical company, or what are the unique features that we struggle with?
Yeah, it's a good question. In my face-to-face work, I work with all sorts of industries, yet the majority of my clients were in healthcare and some were pharmaceuticals. So I classify pharmaceuticals in healthcare.
Okay,
You may not like that, but I classify them in as well.
Yeah.
And also, I also classify aged care. It's very broad for me. It's anyone who's working with and for the betterment of patient outcomes.
Okay.
So thinking though, if we're thinking about healthcare in terms of general practice, working in a hospital setting, working in veterinary practice, the reason I've chosen healthcare is because I love healthcare and I love the business of healthcare and I love the patient outcome side of healthcare, whether that's animal health or human health. Population health is something of great interest to me. And it's also, though, an area that I know and love incredibly. Are there specific challenges? Well, I think there are similarities with other industries, yet I see a lot of team dysfunction in healthcare, and I've spent a lot of time thinking about the reasons for that. And particularly in a clinical setting, I think the dysfunction comes from potentially no training in how to lead a team, how to get the best out of a team, particularly in the hospital setting in human health. In the nursing field, nurses have a phrase you might have heard of, nurses eat their young. And I find that horrifying. It's a common phrase. And around the world, when I talk to nurses, this is a very well-known phrase. And what often happens, to use nursing as an example, that nurses will be in a role in a particular area of the hospital and they might be there, a couple of years, 5 years, 10 years. And they'll be put into management because they've been there for quite some time. They're given no support, no training. You don't actually innately know how to manage people. And I think if I look at the veterinary profession and think about what I received in training along those lines, even as a new graduate thinking about going into a veterinary practice, no one ever taught me how to ask great questions of clients. No one ever taught me how to connect with your vet nurses and that they'll save your life many, many times. No one taught me how do I manage up to my boss if I'm not getting the support that I need. And I think for me, that was quite challenging in my early days. I did at one point have a boss who wasn't supportive, and you're not given these skills. And then as a vet, when you end up running your own practice and managing people officially, again, I don't think many get training in how to do that. And you don't need a lot of training. You do need to understand a little bit about the theory behind leadership and how you apply that as well. Have I answered your question? I feel like I've just talked and talked. I may not have answered it.
No, you absolutely did. So I asked about other unique problems in healthcare, and it is just because we kind of just fall into leadership roles rather than get trained into them. And I see that for sure.
I think I said this numerous times. I think that it's unfair, but it's the reality. In a way, you're a veterinarian, you come out, sooner or later you'll be on shifts and you're the one that's the clinical leader on the shift. Could be 3 months out and all of a sudden a client comes in, there's a complaint or something, or there's, an emergency or something, inadvertently they'll go to look to you. And yet we don't get trained in any of this stuff in conflict management, in management of stress, and also communication skills, how to build and share and inspire people. Like, none of that stuff. I feel it's exciting, but then when you realize what you don't know, you're like, oh my God, how do you teach people? Like, that's like every environment we're talking about now is kind of high pressure, high stress, right?
Yeah.
What kind of things do are there principles that you coach people through, or how do you coach people who are dealing with high pressure and maybe not feeling like as if they're not coping with that?
Yeah, so in terms of leadership is a big topic. So there's often a process of diagnosis, interestingly enough, and I really love that about what I do. It's figuring out where the dysfunction or where the issue or major challenge or skill gap lies. And to me, that's a series of questions. So again, it's like being in practice. And luckily, it was something I love doing in practice, asking questions. So it's understanding exactly where the problem is. And you've alluded to there stress and, how do you deal with that? How do you cope with that? Well, for me, there are a number of core principles to be thinking about. And one of those lies in neuroscience and the brain and the threat state that we can be in when we are feeling overloaded with stress. A little bit of stress is actually good. In fact, we need a little bit of stress to be productive. It's when we hit that tipping point and we kind of slide down that slippery slope and it becomes overwhelmed that I think is really important for people to understand, that you'll have a tipping point and recognizing the signs when you've hit that tipping point. So understanding the threat response in the brain, understanding some of the things that you can do in the moment to be able to reduce the emotion and that emotional hijack, and then understanding some of the things that you can do longer term to be able to deal with that, which I kind of mentioned previously in terms of getting some balance outside of your life. So that's one small aspect of leadership. And again, it will depend on what the issue is. Sometimes there is a conflict management issue, so it's talking through that. Sometimes it will be a change management issue, and it's working through, again, the threat state that's in people's brains when change is implemented and breaking of habits through change. So it really depends on what the main issue is. I have a whole pathway that people can follow if they really want to learn everything in terms of leadership and managing teams and starting to apply some of the theories. Yet if there's just one particular issue we need to focus on, we can dive into that in more detail as well.
One thing that I found was really quite helpful for me was identifying as soon as possible what my earliest triggers of stress were. So triggers of stress, but also identifying how it manifests for me. So instead of getting to the point of overwhelm, it's kind of like, oh, I'm starting to fidget. When I shake when I'm doing my leg thing or like twirling this pen in my hand or something, like I'm just giving you examples of things that I could do or things that I do that then I realize all of a sudden it's like, okay, what is stressing me out? And what can I do to take action? So identifying the early stages of stress, is that at any aspect of a part of the process or?
Absolutely. So focusing in on the stress, we talk about the brain, we talk about the threat state, we understand where that's come from, we understand that it's a normal reaction for people to feel that emotion rising, often driven by a sense of fear about what's to come. Mm-hmm. And then, yes, we talk about becoming conscious of that, because the fight, flight, freeze response is something that happens within a fifth of a second. So the brain is scanning the environment constantly for things that might threaten us or things that might help us. And we're really attuned to things that are threats in the environment. And the brain is taking in 11 million pieces of information per second, which is, I always found incredible to know. We're only conscious of about 40 of those. So it will determine within a fifth of a second whether something's a threat or a reward. So you guys know this, fight, flight, okay? This is an instinct, it's a response. What happens in the workplace, we can still have that fight, flight or freeze response within a fifth of a second, and suddenly we're acting out a behavior. It might be anger, it might be fidgeting, it might be just a sense of overwhelm. That can happen before we're even really consciously aware of what's going on. And by then our emotion is taking over. So exactly what you said, becoming conscious of what's happening and knowing the signals to pick up on it before it does come out in a spurt of anger, or it comes out in a sense of overwhelm, or it comes out in tears, whatever that might be. It's picking up on those smaller things beforehand. It might be the tightening of the chest. It might be feeling your blood pressure go up. It might be potentially the fidgeting. Absolutely, what's going on there? Or sometimes people are clenching their fist. Whatever it is for you, it's understanding what those really quite small changes are, and it's catching yourself before it snowballs into serious overwhelm or anger or avoidance of issues that you might be having. So it's being really, really conscious. So we bring that into our conscious mind. And once you become more conscious of it, you're able to then implement strategies to bring that emotion down, whether that's simply a deep breath, whether that's taking 5 minutes to walk outside, whatever those coping strategies are that you can use in the moment to do that. And then also, as I said, the longer term strategies as well.
I remember when I do surgery, depending on what's going on, when it's starting to get stressed in surgery, I don't speak. And then it's so not useful because like I reflect back on the video clips and things, and it's like the nurse is going, the mean arterial pressure is 40. What would you like to do? I'm like, silence. It's just like,
so it's freeze, yeah.
It's freeze. I'm just like, I can't do anything apart from what I'm doing right now.
Yeah, totally.
But I communicate that. It's like I just silence,
yeah.
And it's so unhelpful. And then so they like after a while they realized that when I wasn't speaking, I wasn't angry at them. I was trying to focus on this. And then what I realized was that actually, how about we develop a hypotension algorithm so that you can work through it yourself.
Yeah,
okay, do this. I'm going to try this thing now. I'll be like, yes. All I need to say is yes or no. But then I realized I needed to, figure out how to be able to kind of focus on a couple of things at once. So it took me several years.
It's really hard. You think about that. I can remember, standing in a clinic and just freezing and not being able to even think because you've got all these things firing at you. And as you say, you've got nurses asking questions and, you might be, a young 27-year-old and you're suddenly having to deal with everything that's going on. You've got a waiting room full, you've got an emergency out here, you've got people talking in your ear, you've got dogs barking. And I can remember that sense of complete overwhelm where I cannot think at all. And that's that emotional hijack of the stress, because what happens, that's taking away all the glucose and oxygen for this prefrontal cortex to actually think through things logically. And we have to bring that into play or we will just remain paralyzed. As you say, it's great to have some strategies for others working with you. It's even more important to have strategies for yourself so that, particularly surgery, we need your prefrontal cortex working, preferably.
My nurses know things are not going well if I just go, switch off the music. Because we have a little bit of music in theater, and as you say, it's just that one distraction too many. I like how you put the stress thing in physiological or neurophysiological terms, because you just think about it, or I just think about it in terms of emotions. It's just an emotion. I don't actually ever think of it in what is actually happening in my brain. So what is it? You mentioned lack of glucose, lack of oxygen. Are there other things for a podcast for scientists? I think we might like it to think of it in, that's the physiology and that's the pathophys. So what can I do about it?
Yeah, I think this is really the lovely thing about when I work with healthcare, because you can bring some science to it. If we're sitting there as a vet and we think, well, I'm a smart, intelligent person, okay, why is this overwhelming to me? Why can't I just deal with it? It's an emotion. And for a lot of us, I don't want to be gender biased, but particularly for men, it's an emotion. Like, let's not just talk about it. We'll never actually get it in hand if we don't understand it. So I think that is really important to think about from a science perspective. So basically, it's your body is preparing for that fight, flight, or freeze. So all of the glucose and oxygen that your prefrontal cortex needs to think is taken away into your extremities so that you're ready to punch someone potentially, you're ready to run away. It goes to the limbs, and there's not much left for the logical thinking parts of the brain to actually operate, and they need a lot of energy. Thinking takes a lot of energy, and particularly if we're having to break habits as well. So the brain loves habits because it goes onto autopilot. It's not using a lot of energy because it wants to save energy for when it needs to protect you from something that's life-threatening. So this is one of the reasons why changing habits and breaking habits is so hard, because the brain keeps reverting back to the old ways so that it conserves energy, because at the end of the day, the brain's designed to keep you safe. So it wants to focus on those things that are going to hurt you. The problem is that in the workplace, and particularly in veterinary practice, there are a lot of things that the brain considers a threat that may not be if we stopped and thought about it. So it's instantly operating on that emotion, as you say, but it's taking away energy. So it's not a bad thing and it's a normal response. But when you're in the middle of a surgery and it's taking away glucose and oxygen from your prefrontal cortex so that you're ready to fight or run away, it's stopping you from thinking. And one of the best things that you can do is to bring that logical brain into play. First thing, a deep breath. Let's get some oxygen back up to the brain. Mm-hmm. The other thing that you can do is to say, what is happening now? What am I feeling? We often call that labeling. Asking yourself a question, what am I feeling? What's going on? That actually, your logical thinking brain can't not try to answer that question. It's something that brings back your prefrontal cortex. And as soon as you start to think about how to answer that question, even if you're still feeling a bit fuzzy, it's bringing some glucose and oxygen back to that part of your brain that you need to. It's lowering the emotion. So your emotional brain is actually settling down a little bit as you think through a question. So I always say to people, definitely take a deep breath, give yourself some space, center yourself. What am I feeling? Okay, I'm worried. And then the best question you can ask yourself is, what do I want from this situation, or what outcome am I looking for? And so if you're in surgery, that might be, well, I want this to go well, or I have to solve what's happening here now. And as your logical brain starts to kick in, again, it'll kick back into those clinical habits and it overtakes the emotion. There's a little bit of science there, but
yeah, I like it.
Maybe you want more. I'm not sure, but that's kind of the basic process.
It's great because I've certainly heard about the labeling of your emotions and actually naming them, but I never put the scientific reasoning behind it. I always thought it was just a again dealing with emotions and that. But it's because what you want to achieve is so you panic and then you default to your old brain, to your brainstem, and brainstem says, "I'm taking over because you're in danger." Yeah. And then you actually need to physically activate your modern brain, your thinking brain, to say, no, don't worry, we're not in danger. I'm in charge because once that monkey brain takes over, shit goes wrong.
Absolutely, I know, absolutely. But it's good to know that this is what your brain is designed to do. Yeah. This is kind of a normal response. You're not going crazy. It doesn't mean you're not skilled at what you do. This is a normal response. Your brain is trying to keep you safe. And as soon as you understand that, you say, okay, I am back in charge, as you say. It's like, so I live on a farm and I often tell stories about snakes because it does actually help to explain the scenarios, particularly if you're not science minded. But, I've walked along in my paddocks very often and I've frozen and it's this weird sense of you're physically frozen and you're not sure why. And then you look down, something's on the ground, and is that a snake or is it a stick? And sometimes it's a snake and sometimes it's a stick. But my brain has kicked in. It's picked up something in my environment that may be a threat to me. And it's acted to protect me before my logical brain has a chance to look down and say, is that a snake or is it a stick? Yeah. So it's a good thing. And sometimes you go, oh, silly me, it's just a stick. And sometimes you go, oh, well, there's a brown snake there, so that was good that I froze. Yeah. So, and that's what the brain's designed to do, and that's the fascinating thing about it. It's okay. The key thing is to recognize what's happening, because protecting me from a snake, my brain is also in other situations protecting me from an angry client, for instance, and seeing that angry client as a threat. And so my emotions rise and I'm getting ready to fight or to run away from that client or just to freeze in place. If I can kick that logical brain in and say, hang on a sec, I'm okay, I'm in charge, you're going to respond much better to that angry client. You're not going to respond and escalate the emotion. You're actually going to respond in a much more logical way if you can recognize what's happening. And that's the trick, to catch yourself in that instant when you notice your emotions rising and to be able to make a choice, because there is that minute piece of time where you have a choice on the actions that you're going to take from there. I
like that snake story. That I have the exact story actually that made me realize that how strong that old self-protective mind is. I live in town where I'm not supposed to have snakes. I genuinely never thought we'd have one, and literally one day I was walking next to the house, and the next thing I knew, I was 5 meters away on the deck in a reflex movement before really registering why I'm running. And then I stood there, and literally I remember thinking for a second, shit, that was a snake. And then going back to go, and then suddenly thinking, oh crap, I've got to find it before it goes under the house, and then running back saying, where's the snake? But I was gone, literally. So clearly my brain was more flight than fight because I was out of there.
Which is good, and that's what it's designed to do. It's like if I scream out fire and people run out before they realize whether I'm joking or not, it's actually a good thing.
Yeah, we're so shaped by our evolution. I don't even know how I knew that snake was there. I don't think I saw it. If I saw it for a split second, and my body responded instantly without thinking about it. So
remember, it's that picking up on, there are 11 million pieces of information your brain's taking in. You're only conscious of 40 of those. So it's picked something up without us knowing. That's the fascinating thing about the brain.
Lovely? The brain isn't clear. So Roz, you talk about, so there's the physical threats, or surgery is an easy example, but I like that you talk about the threats in other people. So an angry client or that. Let's take it to another really common stressor that I think we don't talk about enough sometimes, is the relationships within teams. So we always focus on clients make us upset, clients, but within teams that can be major stresses. Are there common killer, or what's the most common killer of a good team or a good team environment that you find working with teams in healthcare?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I want to jump in. The first thing that I really look for is trust. When a team is not functioning effectively, I'm going to say in about 80% of the time, and this is not a clinical study I've done, but in about 80% of the time, there'll be an element of distrust in the team. And this is a really interesting thing, because we're talking about threats and the different threats in the workplace. Other people can be considered a threat. It's really interesting when a new person joins a team, your brain instantly considers that they could be a potential threat to you. And most of us have the emotional intelligence and the experience to go, oh, do you know what? This is going to be great. I'm sure they're bringing great experience. I'll get to know them and we'll have a great working relationship. So most of us kind of work through that because we've had good experiences in the past. If we've had a lot of negative experiences in the past in particular, we need to understand that our brain instantly defaults to this person could be a threat. Most of us work through that. Some of us don't, though. Some of us continue on that threat response to that person. Now, even if we know that person and then they're not a new team member, if they've done something that has, I guess, harmed the trust that we might have in them or in the team, if they've done something in the past, then in the future, I am going to default instantly to them being a threat. And again, let's remember that a lot of this is non-conscious, that we've got these emotions triggered in our brain because of what might have happened in the past a lot of the time. Again, it's about catching yourself. And unfortunately, in some teams, what happens is people are not aware of this. So they're not able to work through it. They just know, do you know what? I don't like that person. I don't like working with them. And the more they tell themselves stories, that person's out to get me. This is really terrible. I think they're undermining me. I don't like working at them. Then they talk to their teammate. Oh yeah, she's really awful. I can't stand her. Did you hear what she did? And it just builds and builds, and the stories and stories build and build and build. And what that's doing, that's building that emotional threat response. So every time you see that person, you're going to feel under threat. Now, you may not actually notice that. You may not understand that unless you go back to your basics in terms of the brain. So when we're dealing with teams, definitely that's one of the biggest things that I see. It's a lack of trust in each other, and that might come because they're a new team member, but also may come because of the interactions you've had with them in the past, or just your own values. You may not trust easily, again, often because of things that have happened in the past. So for me, that's the biggest one. When I'm diagnosing an issue in a team, definitely talking to individuals, you start to get a sense that, okay, there's some serious trust issues there. And sometimes there's a trust issue with the leader of the team as well. And that's, of course, really, really tricky.
Yeah, I've like you. I've worked all over the world and in several practices, and I haven't found too many perfectly healthy teams. And it's good to. That was a genuine question. I often wonder why. Where's it coming from? But I think you're right. It often is just that lack of trust.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a lack of trust in a really pressure cooker environment. Veterinary practice can be, as you know, really high stress for everyone, no matter what role you have in the team. The other thing that can sometimes happen in a clinical setting too is it can be a lack of trust. It can also be a hierarchical thing, that there's almost a competition who's in charge, because one thing that also can act as a threat in the workplace for our brains is a sense of not being in control, not having autonomy in our environment, and not being able to make our own decisions. So that can cause issues in a team. And particularly if you think about an emergency setting where as the clinical lead, you are actually telling people what to do this, do that, do this, do that, do this, do that. Some people actually go back to that brain instinct again. That can be a trigger for them, a threat state, because a lot of people don't like being told what to do, and if they feel there's no choice. Now, in an emergency situation, again, most of us have been trained. We understand that's what happens. Yet, if you're interacting with a colleague who's telling you what to do outside of an emergency situation, again, that might be triggering a threat state. So if you've got a lack of trust and then you've got that on top, it's a bit of a recipe for a disaster in terms of a team. And yeah, I think healthcare teams are tricky because you've got that pressure cooker environment more so than other professions.
Sometimes I totally get what you're saying, and I agree that trust is the big thing. And sometimes if you don't trust a team member to have you back, or trust a team member to pull their weight, whatever that may be, or trust a team member to not say things behind your back, I can see how that can slowly start causing insidious stories and things that then you start to look for evidence to prove that's the point, right? As opposed to look for evidence to prove that it's not right. And then that just starts that spiral downwards.
Yeah, confirmation bias, that's what it is. Yeah. You look and I'm going to find, and particularly I think scientists are really focused in on this, because you want to prove something, you want the evidence. Oh, yes, look, she's talking to someone over there. Evidence that she's talking about me. And we jump to conclusions that are not really helpful. So leaders in veterinary practice, leaders in any team environment really need to focus on developing trust in their teams. It's such an important thing. And yet again, I don't think vets or practice owners are necessarily trained in how to do that, because trust, that's something, light and fluffy, and that's all about feelings and touchy-feely. And no, I don't want to go away and do a team bonding camp. Well, you don't need to do that. But you do actually need to focus in on just sometimes some small things to help build that trust in the team. And it does take time, but it's devoting that energy to doing it when you've got so much else going on.
I'm not expecting a full explanation of the how to here, but the first question coming back to trust and a team where there is broken trust or a lack of trust, is it fixable? Is it always
Yeah.
fixable?
Ooh, not necessarily always fixable. No,
Okay.
there's no guarantee with that. I think part of the problem may be when it's not fixable is the lack of willingness to try and fix it. And that could just be one party who's not willing. However, most, I believe, can move along a continuum if you like. It may not be fixed overnight, but definitely I think in most situations you can actually work towards solving it, and you can actually eventually get to that high functioning team. And occasionally from time to time, again, if there's no willingness in particular from one team member, or there's some major dysfunction that has happened and people in the rest of the team don't feel emotionally safe with, we talk about psychological safety with that person, then occasionally it means that the only way for that team to move forward is that that person's no longer part of the team. However, I do find that that tends to be less often than people might think. I've seen really dysfunctional teams, for instance, two team members who just don't want to work together, don't like each other and undermine each other and cause all sorts of problems. And there's often open, aggressive conflict there. And I've seen those situations repair. So there is hope. Again, it's just being willing to diagnose the issue. So again, it's just bringing your clinical skills in. Let's diagnose the issue. Let's ask some questions. Let's use great questions to coach to be able to move the team through this. And again, different types of activities. And sometimes one of the simplest things you can do is help the team get to know each other. So it's not about sharing your deepest, darkest secrets. It's not about oversharing. It's about what your experience is that you bring to the table, what your strengths are that you bring to the table. It's knowing just a little bit about the personal life of that person. And again, I'm not suggesting you need to know everything. But for instance, so when I talk to people in training sessions, I'll often talk, and unfortunately my dogs have passed now, but I had 2 Labradors. And I'll talk about my dogs because they're my fur babies. And so when someone in the audience has dogs, we've made a connection. So it's connecting just on a small thing. Now, they don't need to know everything about my life. I'm actually quite a private person. Yet we've made a connection because they know a little of me, a little bit of personal disclosure. So it's helping the team to be able to have some of that interaction to understand, because often some of the distrust that happens in healthcare teams is that they just don't know what's going on for that other person. They don't have the empathy. They're not applying the empathy that they might be applying to a client, for instance. And I always find that intriguing. Like with nurses in human health, a lot of empathetic nurses who are great with patient care still have troubles behind the scenes with each other because they're not bringing their skills from the clinical setting into the team setting. And again, it's often because we've not been taught how to do that, or that it's okay to do that.
It goes back to what you were talking about earlier, that the evolutionary brain, the old brain. I picture myself being a caveman, early Homo sapiens living there, and a new person arrives, or there's a person, and they're instantly a threat. They're gonna take my cave and eat my mammoth, and then I get to know them a little bit, and go, actually they're not that bad. And I think it is just that little bit of getting to know somebody, to see them, to shift them from threat to not dangerous. Yeah, okay, I can work with them.
If you killed a mammoth, surely there's a little bit of meat there. You probably share a little bit of your mammoth, mate.
That's really interesting, though, because throughout history we've had to work in teams. Our very survival has depended on teams.
Yeah.
So it's tapping into that as well, because teams are natural. Sometimes people talk about, teams is a new way of doing business and we're going to be effective if we focus on teams. You will be effective if you focus on teams, but it's not the new way. We've always had to work in teams as humans.
In fact, it's the thing that made us into a very successful species, because individually we're pretty rubbish. We weren't going to do all that well. We don't have sharp teeth. We don't have claws. We're not particularly fast. It was that ability to work, to collaborate together, that made us successful. But it is also, that is also, I personally think this is why it is so stressful, those relationships, because you're belonging to that tribe, you being part of that team is literally in your brain is essential to your survival. And if there's discord, your brain goes, oh crap, I'm going to be kicked out of the tribe. I'm going to die. A lion's going to eat me.
Yeah.
So it is life and death to your brain. This is why it is so stressful.
Yeah. The great thing for a leader is, though, it's tapping into what you just said about belonging. We need to belong. Like, the social need for us to belong is so strong in us, in our brains. Human brains like connecting with each other. There's a social connection, and we have things called mirror neurons that are designed to interpret what each of us are doing, and will often mirror the behaviors of others because of that. And so as a leader of a team, if we tap into that strong need to belong, we can actually build even greater teams. You can tap into it for good or evil. So I think history is full of examples where people have tapped into this need to belong and have created horrible things happening in the world. I think about Adolf Hitler. He was really good at tapping into people's need to belong. Didn't make him a great positive leader, of course, but I think we can use it for good. And often I'll talk to teams about tap into that need to belong by having a shared purpose, a shared vision, shared goals that you're all working toward. So in veterinary practice, what is your purpose as a veterinary practice? What is your vision for success in the next 12 months? What are some goals that you need to hit? If you can get the team sharing those, believing in those, they're wanting to belong, they're all understanding that they contribute to it, you're building a much, much better team. You're tapping into that strong desire to belong to something bigger than just yourself.
Roz, that's a lot of food for thought. I really love that. I love talking about brain as well, and thinking about us as a product of evolution rather than this mind floating around. Let's bring it back a little bit lighter. Vets love to talk about doctors. If you go in any of the vet chat rooms, about how rubbish doctors are, and I was like, this and they didn't do this and this and this. I think we think we're superior. Maybe it's a jealousy thing. I don't know. But are there things that you've come across in teams, whether this is clinical or teamwork or anything, that you think vets do better that you could use in your training? Or was that an arrogant question?
It's not an arrogant question. I'm laughing because I'm thinking through a lot of different examples, and I'm also thinking through having been a patient as well, and having gone to see doctors, more so specialists, and having walked out and thinking, well, animals get treated so much better than you've just treated me. And I can think about going to a doctor with a fever and, not even having my temperature taken, being horrified. So a lot of different examples, more so as a patient, come to mind. And in terms of working professionally, I'm trying to be diplomatic to my broader client group. I think there are a lot of things that vets do in terms of patient care that I would love to see doctors do. I think there are things that obviously doctors do very, very well that I love and admire.
Uh-huh.
The interesting thing that I often come back to with patient care, vets to me have an incredible ability, or a need to, as part of your profession, to connect with both the human and the animal. And I have always looked back on my time in practice and been so grateful for that, because I think vets' ability to connect is probably a bit stronger than what I sometimes see in human health. And I so hope I don't lose clients over saying that. But I think it's come from a necessity. So if you need to diagnose an animal, you have to connect with that person. You have to ask great questions to uncover. You have to make someone feel comfortable enough to tell you that, yes, they do feed their animals treats 500 times a day. You need to have them feel relaxed and comfortable and emotionally safe to be able to trust you enough to share what's going on for that animal, to add to your diagnostic ability. And then, of course, you need to connect with the animal, and the animal isn't always wanting to connect nicely with you. So I think there is that element. And it may not have been as lighthearted as you hoped, yet it is something I reflect on quite a lot, actually. And, sometimes I've been disappointed and sometimes pleasantly surprised. But, I think one of the things, and I think this was from a podcast you did not so long ago, one of the things that always intrigues me is vets being so humble and not putting themselves forward. And I think I've mentioned this to you before, actually. So calling me Dr. Roz instead of calling me Dr. Lindsay. Often vets are called by their first name. And I remember I read a book a few years ago called Lucky Me, and it's about a veterinary oncologist in the US who actually develops cancer. And interestingly enough, she develops the same cancer as she was a specialist to treat. I forget which it was now. And just going through her journey of treatment and the differences that she saw in terms of the way she was treated, it's a really fascinating read. And one of the things that she starts out, and so there are really lighthearted moments in it as well, and she would never allow people to call her Dr. first name. I think it's Sally, Dr. Sally. She'd say, no, it's Dr. whatever her last name was. And that always intrigues me. I think vets probably don't need to be humble in that way, but I think maybe it's a different personality type. I don't know.
Well, what kind of books and resources would you recommend for people who are wanting to step up into leadership or wanting to,
Yeah. Interestingly enough, when people ask me about leadership books, I have a few, and, you can resort to fairly topical ones such as Brené Brown's Dare to Lead. I think that is a really good book, and it's well written and it's fairly practical. What she's saying is not rocket science. In fact, what Brené Brown is saying has been said for centuries. So it's just that she packages that up really nicely. I often, though, refer to some books that are a little bit unusual, and one of them is called The Last Lecture. And it's about a lecturer at university, and he isn't well, but he's talking about life lessons. And I find it really quite inspiring, because a lot of those things that we think about when we think about life lessons help us map out what our leadership journey might or could be. So I definitely think that that's a good one. And there's another one that is called Fish. So it might be good for veterinary practice. And it's looking at how you connect and get the most out of a team from a slightly unusual perspective. And I don't want to give away the story, but it's called Fish. And it is based on a team that were studied in a fish market in the US, and the effectiveness of that team. And they narrow that down to 4 key elements. So again, if you're new into learning about leadership, that's a nice one because it's not too heavy. Because a lot of the leadership books out there are really, really heavy, and that one's a fun, interesting one.
What about podcasts? For any listeners out there, Roz does have a podcast about this, which is a great podcast and definitely applicable to veterinarians and veterinary teams. It is just called the same as your website. It's Engage Your Healthcare Leadership. Is that right?
Yep, Engage Your Healthcare Leadership podcast. So, yep, it's definitely applicable across all types of healthcare. So that was going to be my answer. Yes, listen to that podcast and listen to Vet Vault as well, of course. There's a podcast that I was a guest on, so I will disclose that, but there's no affiliation otherwise, called the Leadership Antidote podcast. And this is by a lovely lady called Dr. Kim Hires from the US. She did work in healthcare. She was quite a senior person in healthcare. And she went through a whole process. She actually had burnout. So, quite applicable to the healthcare clinical environment. And she changed the way she works, and she runs her own business, coaching people and preventing burnout. The podcast itself is not focused in necessarily on burnout. She has guests on. Generally each week there's a guest, and she'll have guests on and they'll talk about their leadership journey and they'll talk about their leadership application to them. healthcare focused by any way, shape or means, yet she does have a background in healthcare.
Okay.
I really enjoy that podcast. It's very conversational, not too long, not too heavy. So that would probably be one to recommend as well.
Excellent. And I always, when we do these things and we talk about leadership specifically, I worry that we have maybe younger listeners thinking, it's not applicable to me. I'm not a leader. You are a leader. If you're not a leader now, you're going to be one soon. So start learning this stuff now. Listen to these podcasts, read these books.
Well, the thing is, it's self-leadership, isn't it? And in a clinical setting, you can be a new grad and you will be leading a team. Whether or not you have authority from a hierarchy perspective, you'll have a clinical authority. And so self-leadership, absolutely. We're all leaders.
All right, we're going to wrap up with the one question. Roz is invited to speak at a global online event with all the new grad veterinarians who are graduating out of their virtual universities during COVID. So it's probably not too far-fetched, the scenario. And you've got a couple of minutes to tell them just the one thing they need to know. What have we got to say?
I would say be curious. Don't lose your curiosity. Curiosity is so important clinically. It's important to make connections with your clients. It's not just about the animals. It also keeps your mind broad and open to different opportunities in your career, in your life, and opportunities that might be occurring within the practice as well. And it will help you connect to the team members that you'll be inevitably working with in fairly close quarters. So I think curiosity is one of the things to keep alive.
That's beautiful. I love that.
Cool.
Excellent. Roz, thank you so much for your time. Everybody go check out Roz's podcast, and her content is well worth it. And we'll chat to you again next time.
Thanks so much for having me today. It's been a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you for listening. Remember to go and check out the show notes at thevetvault.com for a summary of some of the best bits from the episodes and our guests' favorite resources. If you found value in this and you can think of a friend or a colleague who could benefit from the content, then please do them a favor and share this episode with them.